Skyrim is one of the most successful games in history of gaming, with over 60 million copies sold, which is a massive success. In cases like this, games usually become very influential. For example, PUBG was a very influential game and sparked a wave of online battle royale games. It is the legacy of PUBG. But what is the legacy of Skyrim? Where are all of those Skyrim successors and Skyrim killers? That's what we're gonna discuss today. So where are all of those classic fantasy open-world games with a strong emphasis on exploration and freedom to do anything? I guess you did notice at this point that they don't really exist. So we also will discuss why there are no actual games that try to do what Skyrim did. And some may say, but wait, what about The Witcher 3? Is it not the legacy of Skyrim? Hardly. Besides being an open-world fantasy RPG game, The Witcher 3 and Skyrim have almost nothing in common. It may seem a lot at the first glance, but in this case the differences are more important than the similarities. And the most important difference is that you can only be Geralt the Witcher. You cannot become a professional thief, join a cult of murderers and become an assassin, or literally for no reason sacrifice a companion to an evil god. And don't get me wrong, I'm not glorifying Skyrim over The Witcher 3. Skyrim is broad but shallow, and The Witcher is more narrow but much deeper. I'm just trying to point out the massive differences between the games. And besides, before The Witcher 3 we had The Witcher 2. So you can't claim that The Witcher 3 exists because of Skyrim and it is Skyrim's legacy. Now, the most Skyrim-like game I would actually call Avowed. Yes, in my previous video 3 disappointing games of the year, I said that Avowed is the worst game that I've ever played. Yet it has a lot of Bethesda formula in it. That's actually why I included it in the list of disappointing games, because it had a lot of potential to become a very good game. Like it literally could be a new Skyrim, with tens of millions of copies sold. Unfortunately though, Obsidian made a minimal effort, low-budget game for a full price. And it flopped massively. First of all, the game had a very good fantasy universe with many gods, different races, empires, conflicts, etc. Also, it almost had an open world. And the killer feature that Avowed had that is very much Bethesda-like was the ability to combine any weapon with any armor. Combine spells and shields, a magic wand in one hand and a mace in the other. Freedom to create any build you like. Almost in all RPG games you can't do it, be it some space RPG like Mass Effect or fantasy games like Dragon Age. You almost always have to choose a class. You are restricted in your builds. That is something that Bethesda games like Skyrim are doing very well, and it provides the broadness that I've talked about. Unfortunately, again for us, Avowed messed up this massive advantage that they had by making so that you don't have enough resources to sustain this build variety. You have to choose and settle for one build because you just won't be able to upgrade your gear to keep up with the constantly growing HP and attack levels of your enemies. So it forces you to settle for one build, and you can't really switch because the equipment you loot is always of a lower level than your current equipment, so it is useless. And you can't afford to upgrade them because there are simply not enough resources in the game to do so. So in the end, the loot system of Skyrim that always rewards the player is almost absent in Avowed. Now, don't get me wrong, you not just can loot or have to loot. In Avowed you must loot, it just isn't rewarding. In Avowed it is about grinding and struggling. Now, if I have already mentioned the freedom to make any build to your liking, I have to mention one unexpected game that actually partially follows Bethesda formula. And it is Elden Ring. Yes, I'm not crazy. Yes, I know that it is of its own genre. But Elden Ring specifically has many important elements of Bethesda games. First, as I said, it is build building. You want a giant two-handed sword to use as a one-handed weapon? No problem. You want to equip two shields at once without weapons? No problem. A shield in one hand and a magic seal in the other, while being bare-ass naked? Say no more. Basically any build is yours to use in the game. Your only limitation is your own fantasy, and I love it. But to achieve that level of freedom you need to explore the open world. And here we're gonna talk about yet another very important aspect of Bethesda games in general and Skyrim in particular. And it is not just exploration of the open world. Many games have open worlds. What is important is that in Elden Ring exploration is rewarding. For example, as I said earlier, Avowed also almost has an open world, but the exploration is not rewarding. I cannot say for sure if From Software were deliberately inspired by Bethesda games or they came up with it on their own, but Elden Ring is much more similar to Skyrim than it appears to be at the first glance. It is an open-world, exploration-focused fantasy RPG that gives you a lot of freedom to build your own character. Again, don't get me wrong, it is not a Skyrim clone by any means, but a lot of very important elements are there, and people don't talk about it. Now, and the last game I want to bring up as an example of a possible Skyrim legacy is Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 and 2. Yes, again unorthodox, but if we look closer, it is one of the best Skyrim killers we've got. Yes, it is not a fantasy game, however the origins and foundation of fantasy is deeply rooted in medieval Europe, with its knights, castles, royalty, nobility, peasants, etc, etc, etc. And KCD is just that. Yes, there are no dragons and magic, but there are knights, nobility, swords and crossbows, castles, bandits and thugs on the roads. It is almost the same thing. Actually, I can't wait till Warhorse Studio will release KCD 3, and then they maybe will release a fantasy game. That would be fantastic. Now, as I said earlier, KCD games, especially outside of the main story, are very Skyrim-like games. And I'm talking about side missions. You see, even though as with Geralt of Rivia, Henry of Skalitz is a predetermined character, but Henry is more of a blank character than Geralt. Geralt comes from and is deeply rooted in the Witcher book series, when Henry's first appearance was in Kingdom Come Deliverance 1. And yes, even though KCD games feature a lot of actual historic characters that actually existed, Henry is a completely fictional character. That allows us outside of the main story, where Henry is more scripted, to roleplay Henry as we want. Again, in KCD games we have a lot of freedom to explore the open world, meet new characters, craft and loot, acquire skills, lockpick locks, brew potions and poisons, and we even have a mini Thieves Guild and a crime system. Like literally KCD games are the best Skyrim-like games. Again, it is hard to say if Warhorse Studio got their inspiration directly from Bethesda Studio, but they are very similar. Plus, to top it off, in KCD games you have something that you usually don't have in Bethesda games. It is the ability to roleplay in dialogues. So if you like Skyrim and want more of that, but for some reason you didn't play KCD games, I think it is a safe bet to say that you will like Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 and 2. Now, as we see, even though Skyrim was hugely successful, Skyrim doesn't really have a direct legacy, like for example PUBG. Well, except maybe for the rise of melee games and sword games. Because for a huge point in time, at least in my opinion, shooters dominated the gaming industry, be it online shooters or offline shooters. And I think it might be the legacy of Skyrim that showed that these melee games, where you fight with swords and shields, are a good niche. And now majority of games released are not shooters but melee combat based. But aside from that, it is indeed that we don't have the legacy of Skyrim. So why is that? Because first of all, that's a big project that would cost a lot of money and effort. There are literally only a few games that are at Skyrim scale. And they usually have their own big IPs that they just continue to make. It is not like we're swimming in a massive scale, high budget games that are just not good. Now, we have a lot of games that just are doing their own thing, developing their own IPs. If you notice, the gaming industry is really focused on IPs and their sequels. GTA 6, The Elder Scrolls 6, Resident Evil 9, Final Fantasy 16, The Witcher 4, etc, etc, etc. We're a very IP-based industry, and a new IP is a rarity. Now combined with the long development time period big games have, and it is no wonder why people don't just jump to develop games like Skyrim. To be honest, one of the big reasons why there are no games like Skyrim is because a lot of game developers just are afraid to start a new fantasy IP. They think it is risky. You need to create a new fantasy universe from scratch, for it to not be very bizarre at the same time to be unique, and what is also very important, adult and serious. And indeed that is not that easy. Bethesda created a perfect mix of the fantasy universe and became, I would say, a classic among fantasies. That's why I said that it is unfortunate that Avowed turned out to be a bad game, because it is a good fantasy game universe. Now, in the end, Skyrim was the last game of its kind, and there are no game like it since then. Again, I'm not glorifying Skyrim, I'm talking about the type of the game, about the game's parameters. And it is ultimately true. Nobody really tried to recreate it, but I don't think we won't see a game like it in the future. To start a new massive fantasy IP from scratch and create a massive game based on it is not a cheap task. It will require a lot of effort and money investment, but it is almost a guaranteed massive success. Now I think we will get a proper Skyrim successor in the future. Like for example, I've already mentioned that I'm anticipating a fantasy game from Warhorse Studio after KCD3 will be released. And also, it is not a secret that after GTA 6, Rockstar plans to make a medieval-themed game. And if they are smart, they will realize that it is realism that stands in their way and pulls them down while creating games like GTA. If they realize that, chances are that they will go in fantasy setting to gain more creative freedom. We also will see how Bethesda themselves will be able to deal with Test 6. We'll see if they are able to pull it off. And that also might spark a wave of games like that. In the end, Oblivion Remastered showed that people want those types of games. And God knows, maybe somebody is already cooking the next big hit that we don't know about. So don't despair, my fellow gamers. What you should do though is subscribe to my channel, where a massive amount of amazing content awaits you. Like, don't make them wait for you any longer. Also ring the notification bell, and if you are still listening, that means that you liked the video. So show that by clicking the like button to support my work. See you later.